the call for evidence for 5G connectivity. A bit of background for those that are joining us and for board members. We've had a number of representations made to the Council, both in support and with concerns around the issue of 5G connectivity and the emerging technology implications for the Council, for the town, for the conurbation, and indeed the whole area. We have a new scrutiny structure within the new council, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, which has given us new freedoms to look at things in other ways and crucially make sure that people's voices are heard on these crucial issues. And we're exploring new ways about how we may do this. So this is the first time we will be doing this model, which is a call for evidence. So it is new for us, so please do bear with us. But you're all very welcome here, and we're very keen to hear people's views and to get the public and businesses and any interested parties as engaged as possible. So we've undertaken this call for evidence, and the process regarding the call for evidence is firstly that we opened on the 10th of September as a call for written responses, and those written response, that window closes on the 7th of October. So although we have tonight the verbal response opportunity, we do still have time after this meeting if anybody has any further points to add to this discussion. They've got until the 7th of October to do so in written form. We've had a really positive response to that call for written evidence so far. So on top of the people that we've got speaking tonight, to date we've had 168 written responses to our call for evidence around this, and it's been from a very broad range, from all sides of the argument, which is exactly what we want to hear. So you've still got until 7th of October for any further written responses, so please do spread the word. Tonight is very much around the verbal response and opportunity. So the aim, once again, for this call for evidence is to get a clearer picture on the views of 5G and to understand what piece of work comes next. So to be very clear, tonight we are in listening mode. Tonight is not about making decisions. Tonight is not about people's views contrasting with other people's views and call and response. It is very much to hear what evidence people have A, brought together themselves, B, the voice of business and other institutions. And the aim of doing that is that we're trying to add value to this process, and we can then use that evidence to scope out the next frame of reference, what we decide to do next as a council, if indeed we decide to do anything. But I'm sure there will be, from the response we've had so far, something that we will have to respond to. So the next steps is, after tonight, we will be considering all of the evidence and responses, both from the written form and from the verbal presentations we received tonight, and we'll be bringing it back to our Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting in November. At that stage, we will be determining what we do with it, the balance of evidence, and what recommendations we make going forward. So, as I said, today is about listening. We are here to really hear everybody's views on this, and then once we've got all of the written evidence on the 2nd of October, as a board and as a council collectively, we can decide what steps next to take. So the aim of tonight is we've got a number of people that are lined up to present their verbal evidence and to speak, and so I'll be calling them up by one. We've got a lot of people, so what we've tried to do is limit the time to 5 minutes for a presentation for each of the people that are coming forward, although in the spirit of open discussion, if there are any further questions that members of the board, particularly around clarity at the end of those 5 minutes, want to ask of the people that are submitting, I think it's only fair that we engage in that way as well, not for the purposes of a wider discussion, but certainly to try and nail down the discussion, because people have come a long way to provide their evidence at this stage. So 5 minutes, a little bit of time afterwards, and if we do have some time at the very end, because this item is due to finish at 5:30, and there are other people that have not registered to speak, time willing, we can look at that as well. So with the board's agreement, we'll move on to the actual formal call for evidence from the verbal responses. We've split it into two sections. So the first section is those that have indicated that they may have some concerns over the issue or things that they want to highlight in terms of concerns around 5G, and the second side for those that want to have a slightly different view and talk about perhaps positives of 5G as well, because it has been a very balanced level of response that we've had so far. If any of the speakers members are not comfortable with the board asking them questions around clarity in particular, please do indicate to me at the beginning. If they just want to make a statement and leave it at that, that's absolutely fine as well. So again, with the board's approval, the first speaker I believe we have is Mr. John Hunt, who's speaking on behalf of Susan Lennon, representing the chair of the Community Association of West Howe. So I will ask Mr. Hunt to come to the circle. Thank you very much. There is a button that you have to push.
I must say before I start, I don't actually live in the area that Sue lives in. I live in Boston.
Absolutely fine. No, I mean, we're all under the council. So, Mr. Hunt, if I could ask if you want to take a seat and then push the recording button so that we can record you, because this is a public meeting that people will be able to listen to.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm technical. Right,
Thank you.
this is a question that Sue's asking. In my area, upgrading on precincts around the BH10 and BH11 area have been installed. No line and 10 metres between lampposts. What I've actually seen, this is, you know how they connect up the fibre optics to a massive thing. Now it's not being done. Why is it being done by plain vans? There's nothing on the vans to say who the company is, and the people doing it are just wearing plain reflective vests. So is it being done in secret? Yes. Another question. 3 months ago, Sue had a meeting with City Fibre, which are doing all the upgrade. They promised they'd send 2,000 letters out to the area. Not one has appeared. Why? Also, she's a little bit fed up with people because she runs an association. They're coming to her to find out what 5G are up to. And she's not getting any plain answers from her councillors or anything like that. If she'd have been here today, she'd have put it over her. But I have got one question as well. This is my personal question. I don't know if you know, but 5G was developed from a sonic weapon that was used in the Iraqi war. Yeah. And why has the British public not been told about that? And that is my thing. That's all I can say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hunt. That's very kind. Obviously, there are a number of questions there. We're not really in a position at the moment to be answering, so we're here to listen to you as much as anything else. So apologies if we don't have any answers to give you right now, but obviously that will be passed on. Do any of the board have anything that they wish to ask Mr. Hunt around questions of clarity or anything? Or if not, we're happy to move on to the next speaker. Councillor Anderson.
Chairman, I was just going to say I think it's probably a bit unfair to ask questions as the gentleman is here representing someone else. So I would advise the board that maybe we should take that.
Absolutely fine. Right.
Well, all I know, I'm sort of like, so she's disabled, so she's in a wheelchair. I haven't go to meetings, but when she's talking to people, I'm sitting here today representing her.
Yeah.
And she probably right in it, so to speak. There is a lot going on around West Howe that needs investigating. Why are plain vans doing it? Why people, I mean, somebody's installing something, usually up on the side of the bank. We've got red vans, we've had black vans, we've had people do it, and you walk up to them and ask them what they're doing. Well, what's it got to do with you?
Yeah, that's something that we recorded.
City Fire, and we've got someone else. And I can tell you now, they were installing these boxes outside of her house. I went out to see the chap that said he was sat on the wall for 2 hours waiting for his plumber to turn up, and he wouldn't tell me what he was doing. There's a lot of secrecy surrounding 5G. Why is this?
Okay.
Chairman, if I may.
Thank you very much. That was missed on the recording, but it was a continuation of some earlier points, and that will be definitely logged. So.
What is 5G? You've got all the evidence coming in about from all over the world, from scientists that say 5G is dangerous to people.
And that's what we're here tonight is to, yeah.
I don't know if you watch the adverts on the TV. Have you noticed EE are not advertising it anymore? Or Vodafone.
Yeah. Right. Well. Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Hunt. A number of questions there, which is a bit difficult for us tonight, but certainly that will go into the evidence, and it may be something that the board wishes to look at as part of the next steps, to put questions forward as well as statements of evidence that have been provided. With the board's approval, we'll move on to the next speaker, which is Mr. Nick Greenwood. If you want to take a seat, because it records better if you're speaking into the microphone sat down. So as long as you don't mind, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, if you want to push. There we go.
Is the mic on now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Greenwood. Thank you for coming.
That's good.
Over to you.
Okay. I did, as previously, my speech might run into between 6 and 7 minutes, so I seek permission not to be interrupted if I haven't finished within 5 minutes. Is that acceptable?
I'll cut you that leeway. I'm feeling really nice. So that's
yeah.
absolutely fine, Mr. Greenwood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I could tell by the way you're dressed that you're really nice. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the opportunity to present the evidence relating to the dangers of 5G and all associated EMF issues. One of the reasons I'm making this presentation is for the same reason that I've chosen to spend 35 years of my life in this area. I'm retired, but continue my membership of the Complementary Medical Association. This reflects my empathy and concerns for sufferers of ill health. I speak on behalf of myself, and I do feel I reflect some of the growing concerns amongst the public. I claim no expertise or specialisation in 5G. The Oversight Committee has made a call for evidence which suggests they are asking the public to present proof that 5G radiation is harmful. With respect, the onus is not on the public to prove it is harmful. The onus is on the perpetrators of 5G to prove that the safety to the public via independent scientific evidence using the best empirical standards from a broad spectrum of sources. They've got to prove that it's safe, not that we have to prove that it's harmful. Today, I am trusting the Scrutiny Board will act in the best interest of the public and not engage in a futile lip service exercise. Salient points and references are in essence given the time limitations. I urge careful scholarship and research of supporting documents in favour of any lightweight cavalier reliance on Public Health England and its associated bodies. Dr. Sarah Starkey, who is a neurologist, wrote a paper in 2016 titled Inaccurate Official Assessment of Radio Frequency Safety by the AGNIR. This is a group that was set up in 1990 to advise and support the PHE, Public Health England, until May 2017. This is important. The inaccuracies discovered were omissions between the main report and the executive summaries. Usually executive summaries only were used to form the body of evidence relied upon by the government agencies. Vital studies were omitted in the executive summary, examples including reports on male fertility, oxidative stress, and there are many others. So you've got the main body of evidence, but conveniently, it was the executive summaries that were relied upon and used. The reason for the misleading guidelines is probably the conflict of interest of ICN-IRP members due to their relationship with telecommunications or electric companies, which undermines their impartiality. Another government agency followed by Public Health England is International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, and was set up in the 90s for protection from thermal heating effects. Other considerations such as frequency exposure were not considered. So in other words, unless the radiation actually caused a thermal effect, anything else was not considered. That's what that's saying. Now 5G is set to radiate vulnerable biological life on Earth with no satisfactory evidence proving its safety. There have been well over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies and tens of thousands of studies warning of the health effects of exposure to RF waves. The results: DNA single and double-strand breaks, which lead to cancer. Imagine the vibrations of fibres shaking the double helix strands of the DNA. Disruption to cell metabolism, increased blood-brain permeability, melatonin reduction leading to insomnia, disruption of brain glucose metabolism. the generation of stress protein leading to a myriad of diseases. This is just to name a few. And one of those, this includes diabetes from Wi-Fi. Even existing routers produce 2.4 gigahertz. And bear in mind, 5G, when it's rolled out, the frequencies will be even higher than that. We are now facing a diabetic epidemic. And those under 40s have had, that's the paper from last week, the Daily Mail. And it refers to the under 40s, who mainly the people who've had the Wi-Fis, although others have. And the levels are far higher than the year 2000. So please refer to the US National Library of Medicine headed, radio frequency radiated from Wi-Fi causes impaired insulin production and increases oxidative stress in rat pancreatic islets. So in other words, the Wi-Fi, when tested on rats, is used as a model to reduce pancreatic disruption, that it is what diabetes is about. I refer to Henry Lay's research summaries, all the documents here of 2017, which follow on from the Bioinitiative Report 2012 peer review studies. Of 229 studies on oxidative stress effects on EMF exposures, 203 showed an effect. Only 26 showed no effect. On the neurological effects, on the same number from EMF exposure, 208 showed effects. 21 showed no effect. So, the stakes are very high. Human beings, animals and plants are bioelectrical systems. Our hearts and brains are regulated by internal bioelectrical signals, and environmental exposures to artificial EMFs can interact with fundamental biological processes in the human body. The cells use the same frequencies to interact from the nucleus to the mitochondria, the same frequencies that are planned for 5G, by the way. In brief, we need to consider 5G wireless alternatives such as full fibre optic connections. So we have alternatives that we should look at. I've previously circulated a detailed information link to all BCP councillors. My contact with councillors suggests that 5G rollout is fait accompli by stating that EE and Vodafone will be operational later this year. However, we're due for an ICNIRP autumn 2019 guidelines, which follows the discredited out-of-date PHE information. So have you agreed to EE and Vodafone without these latest guidelines? Hopefully won't just use thermal effects. Will BC councillors consider themselves to be in breach of the Nuremberg Code if they commence radiating 5G, as you state, by instigating it in the Lansdowne testbed area? And you'll find it very difficult to get insurance to cover litigation because Lloyd's of London Insurance refuse to cover 5G Wi-Fi illnesses. Just think about that for 1 second. They refuse to cover 5G Wi-Fi illnesses. In conclusion, I strongly urge BC councillors to adopt the precautionary principle by applying a moratorium on 5G, as so many other towns and cities throughout the world are doing. I urge you, not just because you will help prevent thousands of humans and wildlife from devastating exposure to potentially fatal EMF exposure, not just because of the damage to the economy from a sick population, low pollination from affected wildlife, and many other factors, not just because you will save yourself from huge compensation claims as experienced by the tobacco and asbestos industry, but because it is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood, there's a lot of information there as well. I also wanted to thank you for the written evidence that you've been submitting as well, which has been put into the pack that we will be considering. A question from the chair, if I may. One of the things that concerned me when I was reading your written evidence, and you just alluded to it then, was the ICNRIP updated recommendations, which are due, I think you said, autumn 2019.
Yes, that's what I've read in many sources.
And it does seem quite bizarre that people that we'd be rushing ahead with things when those guidelines are potentially just around the corner. So I think that's a very compelling point. And we do actually have Public Health Dorset here later on speaking, so it might be something that we could ask them to pick up on. But that's certainly one of the things that struck out of me. If we're relying on a certain body to give us guidelines and they're about to report on it. Yeah, exactly, and it's already out of date, and that's a very interesting point. Any further questions from the board?
I've stumped you, have I?
It's quite unusual, I'll tell you that.
Thanks, Chairman. If I may quickly,
Councillor Anderson.
I think that you have provided us with a very comprehensive amount of information, and as the Chairman has said, there's a lot of written evidence that you've also supplied. And I think it'd be very remiss of us to try and comment at this point in time. Yeah. I think it'd be very remiss of us to try and comment now, but I think, as the Chairman said, the information will be going into the pack for us to consider and make a recommendation or whatever to the various to either the Cabinet or to the Council. So I think that the best thing is to sort of take on board what you've said and ingest it and wait until our report comes out.
Sounds wise. Thank you. Shall I?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Greenwood. Our next speaker is Mr. Charles Ross Illingworth, who once again has provided a lot of written evidence as well for us to come through. And I believe there is a visual presentation after your verbal presentation as well. So by all means, come forward and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Will you excuse me? I'm not regular with public speaking, so I'd like to read from my script, if I may. Is that acceptable to everybody? Can you all hear me okay? Yes. Should I bring this a bit closer? Is that better? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to talk at this call for evidence. Unfortunately, 5 minutes is an inadequate time to give any more than a rudimentary comment on the issues. I oppose the rollout of the 5G in the BCP area because 5G Wi-Fi puts the population at serious risk of harm. I'm not a 5G expert, nor do I assume expertise in the serious health issues warned of by independent experts in the field of EMF radiation and health. Instead, I rely on the weight of independent expert evidence to inform my position on 5G. These experts warn that a rollout of 5G on a Wi-Fi basis will likely, if not certainly, give rise to a substantial increase in cancer and other illnesses amongst the population. This, they argue, will be directly attributable to the level of EMF radiation emitted for 5G to function. I've already submitted evidence on the subject in the email where I request the opportunity to speak here. I refer you to this in your deliberations. By way of example, in 2018, a study performed by the Latency Institute of Italy showed a conclusive link to brain and heart tumours where rats were irradiated at 1.8 gigahertz environmental emissions. Ofcom and European regulators have identified the 3.4 to 3.8 gigahertz band and plan to harmonise it to make it suitable for 5G. This will be the main frequency band, although there are others, for the launch of 5G. Given that 5G in most cases will operate at a higher frequency than 1.8 gigahertz, it will increase the radiation dosage higher to almost twice the level already causing tumours in rats. It doesn't take an expert to work out what effect that will have on humans. Of course, we already know that this will have a disastrous effect on humans because there are many other studies, albeit at much lower rates of emission than 5G, showing a negative effect on health. This includes cancer, infertility, headaches, nosebleeds, and other medical outcomes that do not show in the control groups. You're looking at a public health time bomb, not altogether dissimilar to that already experienced when asbestos was rolled out as the wonder material of the building industry. The BCP Council website suggests there is nothing to fear if the telecoms companies follow the guidelines issued by Public Health England as the public health lead for local councils on 5G. This is a mistake. The reason is that PHE has been heavily criticised for using out-of-date and inaccurate reports, some of which were also produced by people with a known conflict of interest. The criticism is from accredited independent scientists like Dr. Sarah Starkey and Dr. Don Maish, to name but a few. In this context, the world's largest study, the National Toxicology Program, NTP, conducted by the US government's National Institute for Health, found a statistically significant increase in brain and heart cancer in animals subjected to EMF radio, well below the ICNIRP, that's the ICNIRP guidelines. These ICNIRP guidelines are followed by most countries and form the basis for Public Health England's guidelines to local authorities. The lead scientist of the National Toxicology Programme, Dr. Ronald Powell, has even written an open letter to US authorities to apply the precautionary principle defined by UNESCO and called for a 5G moratorium. Indeed, even the head of ICNIRP stated in 2008 that the guidelines were technical in nature and not intended as medical or biological exposure guidelines. This is not an isolated letter, and there are similar letters written by people of internationally recognised expertise. By the 17th September 2019, 253 scientists, doctors and public health leads, many of whom are internationally recognised, had put their name to a letter to the EU Commissioner for the Environment, asking for a 5G moratorium proposed by Dr. Leonard Hardell and Dr. Rainer Neuberg. This letter is again critical of the ICNIRP World Health Organization guidelines for both being out of date and inaccurate. The increasing criticism of the ICNIRP World Health Organization guidelines has led to a series of 5G moratoria being adopted across the world as local governments wake up to the health risks. In the UK, Trafford, Totnes, Frome and Glastonbury have recently put in place a 5G moratorium. More dynamic, modern and higher profile cities like Brussels, Rome, Florence and Geneva have also recently put in place a 5G moratorium on health grounds. Following their lead, more towns and cities across the EU are now considering or reconsidering their position in the light of the lead taken by these large metropolitan areas. Geneva had already started rolling out 5G but reversed its policies after reports of citizens becoming ill with EMF radiation effects immediately after the rollout. I'm aware that 2 other Swiss cantons have now similarly followed suit. Brussels was the first major city to put in place a 5G moratorium, and as Céline Frémaux, Minister of the Government, responsible for housing, quality of life, environment and energy, said in justifying the 5G moratorium, "I cannot welcome such technology if the radiation standards, which must protect the citizen, are not respected, 5G or not. The people of Brussels are not guinea pigs whose health I can sell at a profit. We cannot leave anything to doubt." With the above in mind, it will be perverse, indeed reckless, as to the duty of care owed to constituents if BCP Council, being on notice of this information, chooses to ignore this. As a matter of law, the UNESCO Precautionary Principle was adopted by the EU in 2005, and the Council of Europe further reinforced its adoption in 2011 by Resolution 1815. Given that the whole of the BCP area is already well served with existing fibre optic infrastructure for the overwhelming majority of homes and businesses, and that fibre optic is also the preferred planning solution under the National Planning Framework, this should inform the Council as to the best compromise between protecting public health and enabling technological benefit. Given the volume of information and the experts of those independent experts, then even if the threshold of beyond reasonable doubt is not met, there is no doubt that the evidence easily meets the threshold of the balance of probability, which is the standard required in law for a civil claim, and thus must be taken seriously. Accordingly, I ask the Council, having notice of the mass of independent evidence, to exercise probity and apply the precautionary principle in the best interest of public health by supporting a motion for a 5G Wi-Fi moratorium. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Illingworth. I believe we have a short presentation of Mr. Illingworth as
If I may note, just before you play it, Ole Johansson is a neurophysicist. He's also a Nobel Prize, recent Nobel Prize winner in his specialty area. And he's one of many accredited academics who've been warning on this matter.
The board happy to receive the video? Thank you very much.
My name is Ole Johansson and I'm a retired professor from the Karolinska Institute and the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. I am visiting England and a conference down here outside of Horsham at Sedgwick Park House, and we are discussing adverse health effects of artificial electromagnetic fields, like from cell phones, baby alarms, smart meters, tablets and power lines. I have studied this area for nearly 40 years, and to me it's obvious from the very vast literature that we need to take precautionary action as it is now, involving a moratorium on 5G, because we cannot take a chance on enwrapping the population in even more wireless energy, given that just one single literature database in Germany, EMF Portal, have more than 26,000 relevant publications, all pointing to that we may be putting not only humans but all animals, plants and bacteria at jeopardy. And I think it's very, very important for all politicians at every level in the country to ask for answers to simple questions. For instance, is 5G safe? And recently that very simple question was put to the American Senate in Washington, D.C. by the Senator Richard Blumenthal, who asked the authorities and the Federal Commission on Communication, and also later on similar questions was put to the Food and Drug Administration. Is there enough research to say that 5G is safe? And it turned out that these authorities, governmental authorities, as well as the operators, didn't have a clue. They didn't know at all whether 5G is safe for humans, animals, plants and bacteria or not. And I think it's a prerequisite for any type of newly introduced technologies of this vast coverage to be proven safe by pre-market testing before it's launched worldwide. And I think it's high time for politicians to speak up and do what they were elected for, namely to serve and protect not only their constituents but also life on this planet.
Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bring. As always, these things always tend to raise as many questions as they answer, don't they? And
Indeed.
I just wanted to say, in response to some comments earlier on, that part of the reason we're doing this call for evidence is not to put the onus on people to bring us the evidence because, you know, we don't want to find it, but quite often you don't know what you don't know. And
Exactly.
this was a
That's why I
response
pointed
to
out at the outset that I'm not an expert, and I must rely on the expert evidence.
One question from me, if I may. I was intrigued by the comments about Brussels and Geneva having a 5G moratorium, which I was really
Brussels is the first major city in Europe to adopt a 5G moratorium,
and again,
and it's on health grounds.
Obviously, not trying to ask you as an expert, but
I'm not an expert.
but you've done some research. What are their next steps? What are they doing about it? Because putting a moratorium is one thing, but are they doing some work around this?
I don't know.
It would be interesting. It might be something for us to explore, because if others are already, you know,
I think that there's a very interesting article that I've emailed to you in the written submissions. Unfortunately, it's not widely available here, but I've run off a copy. If you bear with me 1 minute. Find it amongst this lot. Yeah, there's an academic who's specialised for many years, a Dr. Schürkler from the National Institute for Science, Law and Public Policy, Washington, D.C. He's written a peer-reviewed paper called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks. And in this paper, if you'll excuse, I'll précis a little bit, he recommends that you avoid a Wi-Fi solution for 5G, but go down the network solution in terms of fibre optic and other cabling solutions. The benefit, as he sees it, is that you avoid the vast majority of the health issues that are troubling so many independent scientific experts in the field. whereas at the same time you still deliver where it's critical the high volumes of data traffic that will be brought by 5G. And therefore, it's a compromise solution that is at the expense of Wi-Fi, but not necessarily at the expense of the data transfer. It's certainly worth reading. The full article has been supplied to every councillor here, and indeed every councillor on the council, as I've attempted to keep everybody informed as to the various articles and research programs that I've come across. So please have a look at it. If you need to have the details later, I'll give that to you.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much. Board members, any other points that anybody wishes to raise at this stage? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I was interested in your comment about the landlines and the fibre optic. Now, is that, if we take, for example, 4G, where we have a series of masts, are you talking about the transfer between the masts being connected, or are you talking about the whole of the network? You may not know
I'm not in a position to comment directly on that. You'll appreciate from the documentation I've sent you that by necessity I've scan read most of these. You can't. I refer you to the article. Have a look at the article and see if that informs you. You should have my email address if you wish to follow up. Any councillor, by the way, here is perfectly welcome to contact me for further explanation if that will assist, and I'm quite happy to, again, courtesy copy everybody back out in terms of my response so that you all are on the same page. But I would recommend that you have a look at that article. It's one of many, but he's particularly good because he's been an expert in this field. He's an engineer, as I understand it, so he's far better qualified to give you a sensible answer on that point.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other points that you'd like to raise?
Councillor Lawton.
Just a quick one.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned Brussels and Geneva. When did they declare a moratorium?
Oh, off the top of my head, it's fairly recent, as I understand. I think it's either this year or last year.
It's last week.
Which one? Oh,
Just come from there.
all right. Switzerland last week then. Brussels, I've got a feeling it was July, was it? July. So it's fairly new. The thing is, I mean, when I first came to this, I thought, well, I'll just prove it as a crank conspiracy theory. This is what I thought of all this. And the more I studied it, the more I became convinced that we do have an issue here. And it's one that we can't avoid. And when I started looking at what other cities were doing, I thought, well, no, I've got to get in touch with the council. I've got to warn people about this. And the more I've looked into it, the more evidence I've found that there is a very, very serious health risk. And these cities have taken this on board. And this is why we're seeing discussions, not just here, but across the country. We're seeing it. I mean, there was a recent one in Bath as well, you may be aware. And Bristol, they're having issues over 5G. And indeed, across Europe. And the reason being is that, as the gentleman said previously, this isn't very much in the public domain for most people in the general public. They don't understand what issues are out there, and they blindly take on board the industry propaganda that it's all going to be fine. I mean, we're looking at a $7 trillion business. In fact, I've got a quote here from Professor Girish Kumar, who's professor at Electrical Engineering Department at the IIT Bombay. And he says this, along with the 5G, there is another thing coming, the Internet of Things. If you look at it combined, the radiation level is going to increase tremendously, and yet the industry is very excited about it. They project a 5G Internet of Things business to be a $7 trillion business. So you're looking at a lot of money and investment behind this. An absolute lot. And for those people who seek to make a lot of money out of it, the interest in public health is very, very small, is very down on the list. So I put it to you to look at it in the round. I'm not against technology. I think we've made some tremendous advances technologically in society, and many of them are beneficial. But I don't want to be able to download a Netflix video in a couple of seconds if it's going to mean that my daughter gets cancer.
Thank you.
Mr. Illingworth, thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you for your video as well. And, nobody can say you haven't done a lot of work on this. It's been very, very interesting indeed.
You're very welcome.
We have a number of other speakers to get through, so we'll move swiftly on.
Before I leave, I've left a number of copies for of my talk today with Claire. There is one at the very end which I'd like returned because it's my original draft and I've edited it somewhat. But I hope that helps inform you.
Thank you very much. It's been very, very, very enlightening. We've next got Mr. David Mearfield up next. Thank you for coming, Mr. Mearfield. The floor is yours. Just that seat just there with the light on would be helpful. Thank you very much. 5th of April this year. Thank you very much.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah, good. Okay, I'm coming here today as in my personal capacity. I have no vested interest in making any career or business in this field. I live in Charminster, Bournemouth, and right on the doorstep of Lansdowne, so I've been very aware of the Lansdowne development. I've become aware of these issues fairly recently, I would say, but I've been in touch with the council since... I've been in touch with the council for coming up to about a year now, about the issue of 5G and its ability to regulate or ensure the safety of the people of Bournemouth in this area. And I've also been in touch with our local Member of Parliament on this issue too. And I've also dealt with Public Health England, Cancer Research, and I've been very well read in the area. But essentially my main interest is, in my professional capacity, I was actually a systems engineer, a modeler. I built models for the military, for the Ministry of Defence, models which ultimately were dealing with communication systems. And in that field and capacity, I was responsible for looking at a wide range of criteria that are of concern to the military. Now, obviously, they're concerned with bandwidth, they're concerned with issues of performance-related issues, they're concerned with security. They're not particularly concerned with health as their first and foremost criterion. But essentially, these are all risk factors. And while I was part of a modelling group working at Plessey Christchurch at Somerford, which then became Siemens, then became British Aerospace. And in that capacity, I was looking at a broad range of criteria. And of course, health is very much one of these, because if you have dead men on the battlefield, you will not win the war. So we are concerned ultimately that any systems that we put out there are satisfactory from all of these criteria. And as you can well imagine, assessing a system against all of the criteria is quite a complex affair. It requires different modelling techniques which I'm familiar with in a professional capacity. So enough of me really, except that just to say, by the way, when I came to Bournemouth originally, I came because my parents moved down here and bought a hotel in Bournemouth. So I came here for health reasons of my parents initially. I was sponsored by Plessey and Christchurch, and I came here and worked with them after I graduated from university. So my main point, first of all, to you here today is that I recognise that what you've done in setting up this inquiry or this invitation is to discriminate between what you might term benefits and what we might term concerns. Now, my first issue with that is the fact that what seems to be a benefit to some is in fact a concern to others sometimes. So to discriminate between the two things often can lead to a factional kind of approach to taking on this, in which when one member of the community is warring against another. I'm a firm believer that all of these things are potentially of concern. They are of concern because they affect ultimately the system that's going to come out of this. They affect our lifestyles, they affect the computer systems we're using, they affect the way that humans interact with machines. And so we should be under no illusions that 5G is in fact potentially radically changing the way that humans will interact with machines, and the importance of machines as they interact with us too. And ultimately, which takes priority, humans or machines? This is very important to understand. We're in a point now in time in history when we can no longer ensure potentially that it's going to be humans who rule this world, but in fact machines are going to take an increasing role in deciding for us what they are prepared to subject us to. Machines will decide at what level they want to send the transmission capacity out of the transmitters, and they will not necessarily care too much whether humans get in the way, because they want to talk to each other. And that is quite a frightening prospect, that ultimately on a an ongoing basis, we can never guarantee that machines will not be making a decision bypassing human systems to control them. Now, when you talk about this 5G rollout, as Bournemouth Council, I have a number of concerns here about the way the council's been dealing with this. Primarily, I have a concern that it seems to be latching on very quickly onto the standard spiel of technological companies, which you can track into their publicity material, and it's just a cut and paste job whereby they're talking about the benefits of 5G, which really are all pie in the sky, ultimately hopes and dreams of technologists who want to develop their systems. Now, of course, all these must be scrutinized before they're brought into the public arena, and we don't serve ourselves any favors by promoting the interests of technology before the interests of the public. So I think the council has been very unwise in the way that it has talked about 5G so far. But I don't think it's been any more unwise than any other council in the country, probably, which leads me to suspect it's taking its orders from higher up, or its instructions from higher up. So, for example, when it says faster mobile download speeds, increased bandwidth, blah. I mean, these are all fine statements, but why are those being brought to the public attention when there's lots of other issues that could be raised? Now, what the council have said is that Public Health England will take the lead on health matters, and we've already heard from some speakers that we have reasons to distrust Public Health England. I'll just add to that that thing, basically, the comments that have been made, the essence that even just yesterday, I think it was, or a couple of days ago, Public Health England were actually issuing a statement to warn us against the dangers of LED streetlights. So here we are having deployed LED streetlights, and Public Health England have just about, they've got around. In fact, no, I think the comment they made was 2018, but it's resurfaced again in the mainstream press because Greta Thunberg is actually highlighting this issue. She takes about a year to pick up on things as well, it seems. But essentially, we are always falling behind by taking the advice of Public Health England. We're only hearing the view maybe a year or two later in the press. It's taking a long time to filter through, and by the time it has, we have everything delivered. And that's, of course, is what the aim is of the telecoms companies in this instance, is to deliver it, and then for us to only hear about the effects afterwards, and then we will not be able to backtrack. Or it'd be very difficult to backtrack. Take a brave man to do that when the money begins rolling in. So beware of Public Health England.
So just a few more moments. Thank you very much.
Okay. The other issue was, are big companies taking their responsibility seriously? Well, they are saying that they're not doing any testing in the area, so they're not particularly interested in health. But what I'm concerned about is that whenever you're considering options, which I assume we are here today, we're not considering categoric statements like no 5G, all 5G. I would hope we would very much be looking at options which says partial 5G, partial wired, Lansdowne 5G, Lansdowne Bournemouth Council and Bournemouth University site 5G for various reasons, other areas not. But what I'm mostly concerned about is that we have a consensual arrangement whereby anybody who's in a 5G area is aware of it, is able to take the precautionary measures for their own health that they deem fit. We don't need to necessarily regulate it in all its details, but we need to at least put on adequate signage to make sure that people know where the 5G transmitters are, and then they can avoid those should they have any concerns about it. So again, it's transparency that's the main issue. We must make sure that the people know when the transmitters are going in, where they're going in, and then they can take the steps that they need. But aside from that, it would be very useful if we could actually really sit down and look at the specific technological solutions and options and consider all of these factors in the run, and make sure we put down a number of case scenarios, because I've yet to see any serious analysis done of Bournemouth in terms of the different options of technology mix, in terms of the way people are moving and where they're going and how they're going to be affected by these things in their daily lives when they realise they can't get to the beach except going through Lansdowne, a 5G area. Will they be moving around in a different way? Every possibility they will be, as soon as we start putting up signs to say, watch out for the 5G.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mearfield. I'm going to have to draw it to a close. Looks like we've got probably another 4 speakers lined up. Any questions for Mr. Mearfield at this stage? No? In which case... Oh, sorry, Councillor Fear.
Thanks, Chair. Just in what you were saying about if signs went up where the masks were, for example, and people would be able to take measures about their health. What are those measures, for example? I was just intrigued to know what they would be.
Yeah. No, the first measure is they need to be able to measure, which is they need a meter whereby they can measure the strength of electromagnetic fields and the strength of the electromagnetic radiation that they're going into. These are pretty broad brush. I mean, they don't do huge precise, but they have spectrum analysis on them as well, so you can see the precise frequencies that are coming out, and you can also tell whether it's a Wi-Fi phone, a Wi-Fi aerial, or maybe it's a power line or something else. You can discriminate at that level. The second thing they can do, obviously, is to put on protection. If they know they're going into a Wi-Fi area, a strong Wi-Fi area, there are various protection devices they can use. The most effective are probably the kind of Faraday cage principle, whereby you have clothes which are with silver fibre strands. I'm talking here as an electromagnetic engineer who understands the principles of Faraday cages. All right, I don't understand the principles of crystals, say, for example, but I know there are people who believe in those, and they may well be effective. But I'm not here to promote any particular solution. I'm just here to promote the understanding that if we don't know what's out there, we cannot protect ourselves against it.
Brilliant.
So we should have that freedom.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your time. If we can just wait, can we wait till the end? I'm just very conscious that we've got other pre-registered speakers that I've been a bit too generous till now with the time. But thank you very much. We'll move on to, as a matter of housekeeping as well, this is not Bournemouth Council anymore. We cover the whole of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. So, you know, we are covering the whole area, just so everyone is aware. The next speaker we've got is Mr. Story, Anthony Story, who is coming from Silicon South. Thank you very much. Mr. Story.
Hi everyone. So I'm here to put some ideas forward. I suppose kind of in slightly more positive. So I'm not here actually to talk about the possible impact on health. That's not really an area that I have any expertise in. I'm the director of Silicon South. Silicon South is a support network for the tech, digital, and creative industry sector, particularly around BCP, but also more widely into Dorset as well. So the sector, the technical, digital, creative sector, makes up about 7% of Dorset businesses. It contributes 6% towards GVA and employs 8,000 people. But we're pretty encouraged by the transformational potential of the introduction of 5G. I realise the technology is in early stages, but there's little doubt it has the capacity to make quite a major impact. So the prospect for 5G to support public sector transformation, improve social outcomes across all quality of life are pretty significant. But we're also seeing a revolution in technology use across all industries at the moment. So the introduction of technologies such as Internet of Things, micropayment systems, blockchain, distributed ledger, are all opening up new opportunities that can be delivered by instant and super fast communication, such as 5G. So this is blurring that divide that traditionally there is between digital and tech versus other sectors. So actually all sectors are beginning to merge together quite a lot. So that means that our sector, the sector that we work with, is actually working much more closely with all the other ones, like finance and professional services, which is a 3 billion contributor to GVA here. Engineering and manufacturing, which is coming up for 600 million. Tourism, hospitality, and that employs 45,000 people locally. So introducing the skills and knowledge of our sector to these other industries is enabling them to make step changes in how they increase efficiency and profitability. But this doesn't happen simply by introducing the skills alone. They also need to have access to the latest technology. So in terms of skills, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole has been recognised every year since 2015 by the nationally respected Technician Report as the dominant growth of our tech and software sector compared against the rest of the UK. So these are pretty exciting times where new tech businesses are choosing BCP as the area in which to become established. And this is building a strong technical and tech-associated skills base, which are supported by the stream of graduates that come out of the two universities. So this puts us in a really strong position to maximise the opportunities which are offered by the technology of the 21st century. But skills base can only go as far as the technology allows it to. So introducing 5G provides a new platform that would enable the sector to offer all other industries a new capability to extend their competitiveness, because they can use the latest technology for new innovation. So the next question is, well, what do these look like? There's a lot of, well, what's 5G actually going to look like? And the uses, so for example, the uses could be improving efficiency of machine maintenance. So if you have, say, a 5G connected headset, you can see content-rich instructions while you're trying to repair a machine without actually having to use your hands to look at the device to look separately. So you can just get on with things. Or you could deliver better immersive visitor experiences, which would support tourism. So, I mean, the honest answer, though, is we don't actually know what the killer, well, that's the wrong word to use here, isn't it? So what the big applications are going to be in terms of what's going to succeed. So it's kind of with the advent of broadband, very few people predicted the domination of social media like Facebook and Instagram. We just didn't know that was going to exist. Or the internet supported automation of just-in-time manufacturing. We can't ignore that there have been quite a few failures in the meantime as well, but the only way to know what success looks like is to experiment with technology and see what actually works. So we're in a similar position with 5G. If we've got the technology in place, this allows industry to push forward with ideas which are currently only hunches. Importantly, until the technology is in place, most businesses won't commit the time or money to explore them in depth. The introduction of 5G can provide the catalyst to start this exploration. And there are support networks around which support my sector, support manufacturing, support cyber security, and they're all very willing to try and help to enable that cross-pollination of expertise to come together. Now, this isn't unique to Bournemouth. 5G trials have happened in London, in Bristol, in Manchester, and they've taken the plunge. But introducing 5G to BCP now would enable us to keep up with these larger places. We may not become absolute leaders, but without the introduction of 5G, BCP is likely to fall behind if other areas are beginning to adopt them, and that will happen pretty quickly. So the opportunity to support our nationally recognised growing tech sector would be lost, with the consequential danger that future businesses would choose to set up in more connected locations. So that results in lower job creation and reduced competitiveness. So the tech, digital and creative sector in BCP is very well placed to exploit 5G. Innovation invariably emanates from small teams and startups, and this is a great reflection of the way the sector is made up locally. The introduction of 5G would prompt the sector to work more closely with other priority sectors and introduce a new wave of innovation across BCP and beyond. So it delivers competitive benefits to our sector and makes improvements to economic performance across all other sectors. So that's really the kind of the main thing I want to say. I'm just interested in terms of some of the other feedback that's come through today. I mean, it's all really interesting. I'm not saying it's not valid. I think it just needs to be balanced, and I'm not sure whether there's going to be any evidence put forward which is looking at the potential positive cases or how much is just kind of the negative impact of technology. But I think it's important to look at both sides. I don't have an opinion either way in that, to be honest. But I think you're right, it needs to be safe and secure, but if it is, then the opportunities for what that can do to BCP, I think, are very strong.
Thank you very much, Mr. Story. Any questions from members of the board to Mr. Story? In which case, we will take that as another bit of evidence. Like I say, we're in listening mode today. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts on that. If I could just ask members of the public to afford the same respect to all of our speakers. It is a bit off-putting to hear murmurings in the background, so we are here to listen, and I think that applies to everybody. So if we can afford everyone the same response, respect in that basis. Our next speaker is Marius Angelopoulos from Bournemouth University, who's a principal academic in computing. Thank you very much for joining us, Marius. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I feel somehow the need to properly introduce myself, so if I could spend at least 1 minute. So I'm Dr. Marios Angelopoulos. I'm a principal academic at Bournemouth University. My area of expertise lies in the broader area of computer networks. Therefore, I carry expertise in technological aspects of computer networks, but not in the health implications. Therefore, this is a disclaimer I need to make. I'm originally Greek, and please allow me to say how aware I am that this public forum here is both the epitome and the epicenter of democracy, and I believe that we should all be aware of that. My contribution to this public discussion is mainly going to focus on the term 5G and what it refers to. So I've seen, let me correct that, I have the sense that 5G is being used as a term interchangeably to millimeter wave wireless communications. 5G is a technological paradigm. It does not refer to a single technology. It refers to an ecosystem of technologies, and mainly the aim of this ecosystem is to further improve, ameliorate, and augment the capacity of our networks, of how we generate, share, and consume information. 5G is mainly referring to how we handle information, how we design our networks, our digital networks, to handle information. We can do this with already commissioned technologies, such as 4G, 3G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and so on and so forth, as well as with new technologies, such as the millimeter wave wireless technologies. Now, why this grand variety of wireless technologies? This is because our networks now serve a grand variety of end users in a highly diverse landscape of use cases, ranging from advanced manufacturing to transport to digital health to smart homes and so on and so forth. So we need for each use case a different kind of network in order to be able to accommodate and meet the needs of this wide set of end users. My point is, when we refer to BCP deploying or commissioning 5G, this does not necessarily mean that a new technology that is potentially harmful or not, I'm not a specialist on that, is also being deployed. When BCP says that, you know what, we're going to commission a 5G backhaul network, for instance, this has nothing to do with wireless technologies. This has to do with how, let's say, how the software that operates the network is upgraded and so on. Now, coming to millimeter wave technologies, there is an inherent trade-off in wireless communication. The trade-off on one end of the scale, there is the amount of information that the network can handle over time, that is the speed of the network, let's say, and on the other side of the scale is communication range, right? So usually the higher the frequency, the higher the amount of data that a network can handle over time, and therefore higher the energy that this wireless wave is emitted at, but at the same time the shorter the communication range. This is why analog radio networks can travel through mountains and valleys in order to transmit a radio station signal, whereas our Bluetooth handset has a connectivity range, communication range of just 10 meters. So millimeter wave technology really has a very short communication range. The previous speaker has made quite a strong case for the socio-economic benefits of 5G technologies. in general. From an academic point of view, I will say that 5G networks allow us to do things that we couldn't do before. So, for instance, a use case that is quite visionary is surgeons carrying out operations from distance. This is something that can potentially save lives literally on the spot. In order to do that, the latency between that the network provides needs to be really, really low. The connection needs to be resilient, and so on and so forth. And this is why this new ecosystem of technologies is needed. In the context of our academic work, 5G networks allow us to address problems that we couldn't tackle before, or that allow us to approach these problems from a different perspective. I'm personally carrying out research in collaboration with the British Geological Survey in order to monitor the coastal line of the UK, in order to quickly identify and mitigate dangers from coastal erosion. Other colleagues are carrying out research in digital health, and so on and so forth. That was my case, and thank you very much for hearing me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Angelopoulos. Any questions from members of the board? Councillor Dove and then Councillor Mellor.
Thank you, and this is probably a generalised question from having listened to all the speakers so far. And I'm really, really sorry, so the chair can contest. I am very, very dumb in the whole world of techie stuff. I can't even wire my kid's PlayStation up. When you talked about increase of frequency and therefore it impacts on the connectivity and the distance that data can travel, is there anything in order to mitigate the impacts of that whole 5G sort of ecosystem that you talked about, whether the masts were closer or if they were further, for example, could they have less impact on humans?
Thank you for the question. First of all, there are no stupid questions, right? They're only clever questions, because if you don't pose the question, you will never get the answer. So that's quite right, and this is a valid point. So when referring to this specific wireless communication technology of millimeter wave networks, as I mentioned earlier, because they operate at such high frequency, it means that they cannot travel much in distance, right? So this means that the corresponding aerials will need to be very specifically designed in order not to transmit in space, but in order to siphon this energy in a very specific direction. Otherwise, their energy will dissipate in space, and the signal will not propagate itself that far. Therefore, what can be done? Therefore, these antennae are directional, and the main use case of these millimeter wave technologies is essentially fixed point-to-point wireless, meaning instead of having to dig trenches on soil or on the road in order to lay fiber, we can have fixed wireless links from, let's say, from the top of one building to another, aiming at each other at a very narrow angle, such that they provide a very high capacity wireless link. Now, being able to plan the position and the direction of emission is one way of safeguarding public health from the potential, challenges, dangers of this specific technology. That is the case. As far as I'm concerned, in academia and in research, there are no absolutes. No one is supposed to know everything. But to the best of my knowledge, this is how millimeter wave technology is to be used within the context of 5G. And I believe that this is a way of mitigating any concerns or any risks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mellor.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much for your really interesting evidence. It's a very similar question, actually, but I think it's a very similar question. We'd heard before around wired solutions as opposed to wireless solutions between the masts. I think you've effectively just said that you've just explained what a wireless solution is. Because you were saying that if it was on cable through streets, that's effectively a wired solution. So when you'd heard any of the other previous speakers talk about the health benefits of wired solutions over wireless solutions, was there anything you would add to that, or effectively have you just answered that question?
Yeah, more or less it's in the same context. Previous speakers referred to mixed technology solutions, I believe. This is a valid point. Definitely the network architects or the planners can look into such solutions. I believe that, and this is the great added value of these public discussions, to try and demystify certain aspects, and actually via this rigorous process, public process, is how the trust of the public is being built, and how we will all be able to elicit added value from these technologies. Thank you.
Brilliant. One more question. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question. Again, I'm not a very technical person. It's just a follow-on from the question that Councillor Dove had asked. So when you were talking about the masts being, say, on top of a building, and you narrow the range so that the signals will then interact with each other over whatever that distance is, I can't think of the correct terminology, but when the signal travels from one antenna to the other, what is the radius of travel? Does it go single direction, or does it go in waves so that it then hits sort of further down? So if your building is, so what I'm trying to get at is, if your building is this tall and people are walking down there, does it actually travel as far down as that?
So thank you for the question. Disclaimer is that I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm a computer scientist. But to the best of my knowledge, this is actually an open research problem that people researching this area are actually facing. And the reason is that because the dissipation rate of millimeter waves is so high, they're actually having troubles being able to consistently aim at the target, because the moment that the line of sight is just off, the connection is lost. So without being an expert carrying out active research on this topic, to the best of my knowledge, directional antenna, they have a really narrow angle of active transmission path. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Angelopoulos, for coming. I understood every word of that, obviously, but no, thank you for your contribution. We have 2 more speakers in 10 minutes, which is either really good timekeeping or not. Mr. Adrian Dwyer, we have as the next speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Dwyer.
Adrian Dwyer, I'm a local resident. I've no connection with 5G or 5G industries. I'm involved in the testing of autonomous vehicles, which is one of the opportunities for 5G. I think it's worth putting opportunity in context. Innovate UK said last year that our region is the joint worst for receiving government grants, and it's that it is that we are joint worst at applying for government grants. I don't think that's a great accolade to have. 80% of the grants that do go to our area, our region, go to Bristol. So I'd like to talk about the opportunity that 5G presents, because it is one of the areas that the government are putting a lot of money behind. autonomous vehicles is just one of a number of opportunities. It's something I know a little bit about, which is why I'll concentrate that initially. The testing of level 4 and level 5 autonomous vehicles requires real life scenarios. So for example, Castle Lane East, where the white lines are faded, where you're constantly changing lanes, where the signage is not great, is absolutely perfect for real testing of autonomous vehicles. BCP is an airport for vehicle manufacturers to fly in from Detroit and Tokyo and Munich to bring in their engineers, their test facilities, and they have brownfield space for the technical centres, data centres, for which 5G is a prerequisite. And I'll talk in a minute about the latency of 5G. Just to put this into some context in what other people are doing, one of the largest telecoms companies in Europe has bought a race circuit in Spain as a hub for 9 test routes around the area, all of which will have 5G connectivity, which, as I say, is a prerequisite for the testing. For testing, the investment is billions of dollars. The jobs that are being created are test engineers, they're senior scientists. They're not minimum wage type salaries that these people are bringing in. More closer to home, the West Midlands have applied for and got a £25 million grant for a test bed. It's mainly straight roads and a few roundabouts, but their intention is that, and they're implementing right now, 5G, along with all of the data centres and the engineers that are associated with that. That's a £25 million opportunity, which has a rollout to lots of different companies, including one that I'll talk about in a second. But surely automotive vehicles is only about the West Midlands. Actually, not so. The world leader in virtual simulation of testing autonomous vehicles happens to be literally over the border in Romsey. 7 years ago, it was one man working in a shed. Today, it employs 20 people on high salaries and supplies 8 out of the top 10 vehicle manufacturers. That is an opportunity. That is an example of how technology has been adopted by one particular person who was then able to exploit that technology and now has a world-leading company. And I think what the opportunity is for BCP is to enable and facilitate companies to look into those technologies and develop them and become leaders in their sector. I mentioned low latency, and I'll also cover big data. By big data, just to put this into context, we now deal with petabytes of data. So that's 1 million times the size of any one laptop that's on the table here, just to give you some sort of context there. And as the world transitions to cloud-based computing, the idea where we have a low-spec PC connected to the internet, which has got big servers somewhere out in space somewhere, you know how frustrating it is to sit and wait for something to happen on your screen. Well, it's absolutely critical for people who are using technology for doing AI analysis, artificial intelligence analysis, to be able to transmit those files at a speed that you can actually work at. The World Health Organization has categorized the risk as inconclusive, and I too have a health concern. I've got a family, I live in Christchurch, you know, I don't want to impose a health risk on anybody, least of all my family. BCP, in collaboration with Medical Sciences at Bournemouth University, could take a lead. It could be part of clinical trials that could provide a more conclusive answer to the very important health issues that relate to this. If BCP is to substantially increase our gross value add, it needs to attract high-tech industries. High-tech industries require bright people, and hopefully we can retain more of the university graduates that come out of Bournemouth University, and I know that's one of the key strategic aims. BCP could follow what is happening at the West Midlands, Bristol or Spain, or it has got the opportunity to take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Dwyer. Any questions from members of the board? Oh, yes, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned about getting BCP involved. What would you like to see BCP do?
Could you repeat that? I didn't hear
Sorry,
that.
you said about getting BCP involved in some of the trials and stuff. What would you like to see BCP do to sort of try and help this?
My understanding when I contacted BCP is that the priorities are currently being established as to resourcing.
Thank you very much. Right, we have one final speaker, which is Mr. Sam Crowe here from Public Health Dorset. So if we could ask Mr. Crowe. While Mr. Crowe is coming up to the table, I just wanted to point out we did have a lot of members of the public here tonight, many of whom weren't able to squeeze into the room and are actually watching us from the committee room. To those members watching from the committee room, hello. Sorry you couldn't get in here, but hopefully you've been able to follow it on the screens. Thank you very much, Mr. Crowe.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me clearly? So, my name is Sam Crowe. I'm the Director of Public Health for BCP Council and also Dorset Councils, and my role is to provide independent advice on any of the harms that may be facing the populations of the two councils. So I'm here tonight not really to speak in favour or against the current proposals, but I am going to give you some information and some background on some of the statements that have come out from Public Health England, and I'd also like to talk about the role of the World Health Organization in assessing what's currently known about the harms to health arising from this new technology. So my advice is independent. I'm not an expert, I'm not a radio frequency expert, but like many things in public health that can become quite complicated scientifically, we do rely very carefully and very closely on some of the advice from Public Health England. I think the first thing to say is that in my experience, Public Health England tend to be a very, very cautious body. So the precautionary principle, which has been mentioned a couple of times tonight, is absolutely at the heart of their risk assessments when they're starting to try to give impartial advice to governments and to councils on harms to health. So they are an independent body. They're not part of the government, but they are a government agency, and their role, like my role in local government, is to provide independent and impartial advice based on the best available scientific knowledge. So I'm sure many of you will be aware that Public Health England have come out in public and they have said that as far as they are concerned, as long as the exposures arising from 5G technologies remain within the guidelines set by the International Commission on Non-Ionising Radiological Protection, there's no cause for concern to human health. So the current...
Thank you very much. If you could,
as I said, I'm not here to speak in favour or against the technology. I'm trying to give the national position. These are fairly respected scientists, and I'd also like to talk about the role of the World Health Organization. The WHO has been researching this area for a long period of time because electromagnetic field exposures have been around at frequencies way, way higher than the planned exposures for the current 5G network in the Lansdowne. So the current guidelines go all the way up to exposures up to 300 gigahertz. The planned exposures arising from the Lansdowne network, I understand, are a few tens of gigahertz at the most. So the WHO's advice, having studied the scientific evidence going back over a number of decades about exposures to electromagnetic radiation, is that at the frequencies that we're talking about for 5G, there should be no concerns for human health. That is the WHO's independent assessment. They are not connected with industry in any way. They are the leading public health body for global health. There's been some discussion tonight about the current ICN-IRP guidelines, and they are indeed being updated. So they're due to be released in the autumn 2019. I think it's also worth noting that that has undergone a full public consultation. So they've been working with a whole range of scientists to try to get an up-to-date consensus position on the thresholds that are set by the guidelines to make sure that the industry is safe. And that's also gone through full public consultation. So no matter what you think or believe, that whole process has been done transparently. It's online, people have been able to contribute to that, and the updated guidelines are expected fairly shortly. I think the final point I wanted to make, because I'm mindful of time, is my role as Director of Public Health is obviously to advise both councils about what are the most important threats to health. The assessment of harms arising from environmental exposures is not straightforward, and I'm not coming here to the panel tonight to pretend that it's anything other than that. It is quite complicated, but in my view as the Director of Public Health, the environmental exposure that I would be most concerned about is the threats to health from airborne particulates from vehicle emissions and not 5G technology. So I just thought it's worth putting that context around some of the statements that I've made tonight. That is a proven link between particulate airborne pollution and human health, and that is what I would be most concerned about, and that would be where I would be advising councils take action, not on 5G.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crowe. Any further questions of Mr. Crowe from members of the board? Councillor Mellor.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. You educated us on one effectively, study review that's guidelines that is coming out. Are you just in terms of giving us a sense of context in terms of taking a view around whether this is something that is still, I think we heard earlier, WHO said it was inconclusive. Are you aware of any other studies or work going on with WHO, PHE in terms of clinical trials trying to be more, concluded in the work that they're doing, or can we infer the fact that there isn't a significant amount of extra work going on, that they're already completely comfortable with the safety of this technology?
So I think the answer to that question is obviously the guidance is being updated as new evidence comes to light, and obviously there are studies that are ongoing. I'm more than happy to contact PHE for an updated position. I'd like to just correct what I believe the WHO's current position is not that it is inconclusive. They have actually come out with a statement to say that on balance there is no reason to be concerned about the threats to human health. The WHO's, so there are two things going on. There's the review of safe exposure levels, which is what ICNRP are concerned with, and there's also the more long-standing research which lots and lots of biologists have been involved in, and the WHO, as far as I'm aware, does not carry out direct studies itself. What they are doing is they are summarising and assessing that body of evidence and then producing a view based on that.
Thank you, Mr. Crowe. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Sam. We've been hearing a great deal, all sorts of opinions, all sorts of information, and indeed evidence. That's the whole point of today. As Councillor Dove has rather amply illustrated, we're not all experts on this, but we are being asked to evaluate some of the information that's being put before us. That's what we will be doing at our future meeting. And in order to help us in that, I just wonder if I've noted an awful lot of acronyms down through the comprehensive notes I've been taking, and I will go back over them, but I am not familiar with every one of those, and I will need to do some evaluation for myself. For you as the Director of Public Health, the reports which have been referred to in terms of the health benefits, disbenefits, specifically the disbenefits that we've been presented with this evening, are they something which broadly have been evaluated, to your knowledge, within the advice that Public Health England has handed down, or that you have done locally? Notwithstanding the fact I accept that the guidance is to be updated, but was there anything in what we've heard tonight where you thought, oh, actually I need to go back and have a look? How confident are you with the research that Public Health England have done into those reports?
So I'm confident in Public Health England's position because it's based on the work of the WHO, but I think one of the things that's come out tonight is perhaps a bit of local assurance on some of the evidence that's been submitted, so I'm more than happy to take that back. But I haven't been party to that evidence, so I can't comment on it until I've seen it.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, sorry, is that an offer to perhaps come back to this panel with some further research in helping us to evaluate that?
I'm more than happy to look at what's been submitted and to give that a view.
Thank you.
Councillor Lewis.
After all the reassurance that you've given us, what would you say to the hundreds of experts that are very, very against and very worried about the use of 5G? I mean, in a way, do you think we're all being used as guinea pigs because it hasn't been tested enough? Apparently there are from scientists, doctors, environmental organisations and citizens 152,855 signatures which have they've all written to the UN and the WHO against it. There are a lot of scientists. A former president of Microsoft Canada, Frank Clegg, says that over 230 scientists and researchers from 41 countries have formally written to the UN and the WHO expressing their concern over the planned rollout of 5G technology, especially for children, pregnant women and the environmentally sensitive. So while this is the case, surely we can't risk people's lives with this.
Councillor Sam Crow. So I understand there's a lot of public concern about this, and as part of my professional networks, there are other directors of public health being asked the same questions in other towns and cities. But professionally, I have to rely on the bodies that I work closely with, because we don't have the resources locally to prove this one way or the other. So we are in the hands of, large organisations that have extensive experience in assessing.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, we can let Mr. Crow finish. Thank you.
So, we are having to work with trusted bodies that do assess the value of this information. They do make assessments very, very carefully. They have, frameworks that they apply to assess the quality of the evidence. They go through a very, very careful process of selecting studies, but that isn't selection to try to predetermine an outcome. That's selection based on the methodology that's been used. Was the study the right type to be able to answer the question that it was trying to answer? And unfortunately, in science, there are an awful lot of studies which can be used in different ways, and sometimes can be used to perhaps arrive at a misleading conclusion. So I do understand, and obviously there is an ongoing dialogue with Public Health England, and as directors of Public Health, we are in contact with Public Health England and asking them whether they would change their view at all. As I've said tonight, I'm more than happy to look at some of the evidence and some of the studies that have been submitted.
And that will be very, very welcome, actually.
And I'm happy to come back to the panel and answer questions.
Councillor Lawton, and then we will have to wrap this up. Thank you, Councillor Lawton.
Thank you, Sam. I've known you for a long time. I've always respected your views. You're a good scientist, as I was once, but that was a long time ago. Can I just say that we as councillors and as a council, we have a duty of care to our residents, which we all respect, but sometimes we have to rely on scientific and knowledge which is beyond our normal capacity. Can you give us the reassurance that in your professional opinion you believe that 5G does not constitute a risk to public health?
So as I've said before, based on my assessment of the studies that have been done, or the summary of studies by WHO, the ICN-IRP guidelines and the PHE statement, I would not have concerns, but that's as long as exposures don't come anywhere near those thresholds that are set by the guidelines. So there's an industry responsibility and a planning authority responsibility that goes alongside the guidelines to make sure that the way that the networks are deployed means that people won't be exposed to exposures beyond those guidelines. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Mr. Crow, thank you very much for your time this evening. I've only myself to blame for congratulating ourselves on good timekeeping, because that didn't really work, but we do have one final bit to do. First of all, thank you to all of the speakers that we've heard from tonight with the verbal evidence. So thank you to Mr. Hunt, to Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Illingworth, Mr. Mearfield, Mr. Story, Mr. Angelopoulos, Mr. Dwyer and Mr. Crow. Board, we do have a recommendation in front of us in the paper, which is threefold. First of all, that it's recommended that the Overend Scrutiny Board receives representations on the matter of 5G connectivity during its meeting tonight, which we've duly done. Secondly, that we note the option for representations to also be submitted in written form as outlined in paragraph 7 of the paper. And as a reminder to all members of the public here tonight and in the other room, we do still have until the 7th of October for any further written submissions to be put to us. Please rest assured that we are taking this seriously. We'll be taking on board all of the points that have been raised tonight and all of the written evidence as well in determining what next steps the board wants to recommend from here on in at its November meeting, which leads me to recommendation C, which is that notes that all representations made in line with A and B will be provided to the board for discussion at the meeting of 11th of November. If there are no further points, is the board happy to accept those recommendations? Agreed. In which case, it just leaves me to adjourn the meeting until the next substantive item at 6 o'clock. Once again, thank you to everyone who came tonight. This is very new for us. I hope you found what we're trying to do here and engage and listen useful. And please do come again. Thank you very much.